Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks a lot for having me. Thanks a lot for coming, actually. We have been working this very hard on it, and it's quite exciting to finally see it come to fruition. Let's get started. I think for all of us here, I do not have to elaborate too much on this slide, but it's just good to get started that we are in a current polycrisis, or simply put, we're in a mess. And it was really good to see that the speakers that we had just before me already very nicely set the context in terms of that there's many different things coming together. We have the climate crisis, we have a nature crisis, we have a social crisis, we have an economic crisis, all those things coming together. And circular economy, and I think we heard it quite nicely in the sharing on Bill M. It's really about rethinking and reimagining the economic system that drives us. So let's have a look at what's currently going on and what the problem is with that. So at the moment, we are stuck in an unsustainable and very extractive take, make, waste system, or a linear economy. Meaning we take resources from nature, we make stuff, we don't use them for very long, and I'll share more about that later, and then we waste it. So a nice straight line straight into the garbage bin. And that's a problem on many levels. First and foremost, the way and the speed at which we extract resources, take from nature, is increasing, and it's an unprecedented pace. And that has a huge, huge issue an impact on the climate. Just to add some numbers here, around 50% of greenhouse gas emissions actually come from or caused by resource extraction, which also includes, by the way, the extraction of fossil fuels to power all this. So what we consume, what we take from the planet, has a huge impact. And just to show you some numbers, and I know this is very small, so you can't actually read the details, but this graph is starting in the 1970s all the way to 2020. And you can see how it's exponential growth. The huge purple here, that's sand, which is also just an indication of what a big role, for example, built environment is playing. But blue, those are metals of various sorts. So the various devices that we have, also built environment, etc. So our growth has been exponential over the last decades. And this phenomenon is also often called the Great Acceleration. And again, I'm aware you're not able to actually read the details, but I think you can see the graphic impact of those visuals. This is basically putting next to each other the rapid increase of human activities, so socioeconomic trends like population growth, GDP growth, etc., with Earth system trends. And before the beginning, David Greg was sharing about the planetary boundaries and the work of Johan Rockström. Some of you might be familiar with that, or I guess many of you, the idea that the way that we're currently operating on this planet, we're actually pushing and crossing these boundaries. And you can see here again, looking at these two sets of diagrams, the way that we increase our activity, the way how we increase the negative impact on the globe, on our planet. And the problem is that we do this, and there is definitely also a lot of positive outputs, the reduction of poverty to some extent, progress, I'll come back to that. But the way that we do it also has a lot of very negative impacts. We basically design, produce, consume as if our planet had no limits. But, and as we see in the concept of planetary boundaries, there are limits, they're very real limits. And there are many, many different numbers that I could show here, but I just wanted to also link it back to today's program to hopefully get you excited about some of the sessions coming up. Just one number, that since the 1960s, the production and consumption of single-use plastic has increased 20-fold. Just one of many numbers. This is single-use, but even the things that are actually produced to last longer or be used longer actually are not. So I'm sure many of you here, who of you has something like that? And most of us do. Now think about how long have you had them? Or how many of them have you had? Well, on average, the lifespan of consumer electronics, like those earphones, is at the moment around 2 to 3 years. Just in the early 2000s, there was 6 years. So what we produce takes a lot from the planet, and then we use it for a very, very short amount of time. And I have another graphic here. This is from 2020, so the numbers are still a little bit higher, but not that much. So smartphones, around 1 to 4 years in our pockets. Tablets and laptops, 5 to 6 years. And the reason this is happening, there are many reasons, but maybe two worth mentioning. Are you familiar with the term planned obsolescence? Yes, many of us have heard that this idea that products are designed, and that's where people like me come in, products being designed to become obsolete, products being designed to break, to not being updatable, upgradable, etc. But the second concept that also comes in here is psychological obsolescence. That's the idea that we actually want to replace things because we feel they're not so nice anymore, there's a nicer, newer thing, etc. And those two concepts work together to support this. And you see that's on one hand the economic system that's built on that, but also the consumer behavior, the consumption behavior. So with that in mind, what happens afterwards? Well, here in Singapore, and those of you who have seen Sophia's sharing, know the majority of our stuff in Singapore ends up here. So this is the Tuas incineration plant. In fact, it's around 91% of what we take from the earth actually is wasted. So then we can all ask ourselves, how soon will our AirPods or other things actually end up here? And as a designer, I have to ask myself, how soon will the stuff that I design end up here? As a business owner, as someone who sells things, you can ask yourself the same thing. And Sophia mentioned that as well. The ash that is created here for burning, yes, the volume is reduced by 90%. So it's a lot less volume, but the island where it will all end up, Semakau Island, is stated to be filled up by 2030, 2035. And I think many of you also know that there currently is no official, at least, plan B of what's going to happen afterwards. But I want to make a very strong and clear message here, which I think is very important for us also organizing this day. Circular economy is way more and way bigger than just waste management and recycling. Yes, waste management and recycling do play a role, but we actually have to think way upstream. We have to look in a systemic way of how we actually going to start or are already starting to tackle this problem. And this is important because, what I mentioned before, the rate and the range how we take things from the planet is increasing. In fact, right now we're using up around 1.75 planets per year, which means that, I don't know, who of you is familiar with the Earth Overshoot Day? Okay, a few. For those of you who have not heard about the concept, it basically marks the day in the year when we have used up all the resources of the Earth that can be regenerated naturally within a given year. Meaning after that day, we basically live on credit. Credit of the future, credit of the next generation. Does anyone know when Earth Overshoot Day was this year? Almost, it was 24th July, but yeah. So in the middle of the year, basically. Having said this, this is the global view, and it's unfortunately is getting earlier and earlier every year. There is also, and if you're interested, I highly recommend that you check out the Global Footprint Network page. There's also a global view, and again, I know this is too small for you to read, so I kindly marked out. Actually, Singapore, unfortunately, is right up there. If the whole world would live like Singapore, Earth Overshoot Day would be the 26th of February. Which just shows that what we do, how we consume, how we produce, how we operate, how we design has an impact. And I really like that when David Craig was sharing before, this is important not only because we only have one planet, no planet B, that should be reason enough, but I know it is not always. It also is very important and dangerous in terms of business. He mentioned that number, and I just wanted to bring it back. Around 50% of global GDP is dependent on ecosystem services. Now, you can think what you want about GDP. I know there's a lot of discussion, but right now we're still very much dependent on this measure. What that means is that 50% of the industries are dependent on raw materials, water, air, soil formation, pollination, etc. And just, I'm not going to spend too much time on that, but just to give you a view, there is actually a really interesting report by the World Economic Forum on PwC, just to show you some of the industries that actually are impacted. Some are very obvious. Yes, agriculture, forestry, construction. And you think about it, you might not be yourself in this industry, but some of you might. But we all are dependent on that. So it's an economic impact and it's a very personal impact. And you can see there from the operations, supply chain, or customers, highly impacted. And here another slide just with some others that are moderately but still strongly impacted. So it is a wide range of the economy, 50%. So what can we do? I say like recycling is not enough. So let's maybe dig a little bit deeper. What is the problem? And one thing that I also discussed with my students the last semester, they might be a bit bored of me talking about it, but one thing that I really think is important, we need to change our narrative. We need to change how we think about progress and innovation. And I want to show you an example that is not AI, that is real. This is a cover from Life magazine from 1964, I believe. And this was the original headline. Throwaway living, disposable items cut down household chores. So just a few decades ago, we were celebrating the fact that we can just throw stuff away and it's so much easier. And this kind of thinking, which is maybe not as blatantly going on anymore, but it's still very strongly within us, that's really what got us into this mess. So I just wanted to bring here this quote from Peter Sanger, that today's problems come from yesterday's solution. So when you think about progress, when you think about innovation, and in my case also design, we have to be very, very careful to think like, what's the mindset? What is the underlying system mindset that we're actually perpetuating? And how much do we consider externalities, marginalized group, and the planet that we all depend on? So for me, what is mind-boggling is that we currently live in a world where our phones will be obsolete in about 2 years, or according to the diagram, maybe 3 years. This water bottle will outlive all our grandkids. On average, a water bottle takes around 500 years to compost in the wild, if it actually does. So if our innovation strategy is built on something like this, then we have a fundamental problem. And this is where circular economy can come in and really offer some alternatives. It is more than recycling. It's on one hand moving from a linear economy where we're just really designed for the garbage bin, moving not just into like a recycling economy where you like add one more loop in it. It's really about designing out completely waste and pollution, or at least as much as possible. It's about keeping products and materials in use for as long as possible. And it's about regenerating our natural systems. So it's really looking at the full life cycle of what we actually do, the full life cycle of what we design, the full life cycle of what we consume, what we use. It might not be a full perfect circle, but it's really about completely rethinking, not just at the end of this journey, but at the beginning. And one interesting way to look at it is also to think about how can we preserve value? How can we close the loops, meaning things won't just go directly into the waste bin, the landfill, etc. But also how can we narrow loops? So how can we not go all the way to recycling, but keep them as long as possible in the closer loop of reusing, repairing, refurbishing, etc. And how can we intensify loops? How can we think about more people renting things instead of owning them, having several use cycles for one object, etc. So really shifting how we understand what value is, keeping all the value that we put into the production of a product for as long as possible within the cycle. So moving from a linear model where it's all about sell more and faster to circular strategies where we think about using smarter for longer. So some of you might be familiar with this list of our strategies, especially in Singapore. It's mostly reduce, reuse, recycle. And yes, I've been bashing recycling and I will continue to do so a little bit. It's on the list and it's important. But these strategies have actually a hierarchy. Back to my point on narrowing the circles, really trying to start from the beginning of reducing what we use, reusing it as often as possible, repairing it, refurbishing, etc., and at the end recycling. And one strategy that I actually think is my favorite and that often is missing on this list is actually refuse. That's fundamentally thinking not just, do we need this? Can we do with less? But also as an innovation engine, how can we solve certain needs in a different way without actually creating something new? How can we solve needs in a creative way that uses no resources and builds on existing systems? So, reality check. How circular is our economy actually? Well, there is a foundation, the Circular Economy Foundation, who actually since about 10 years is creating an annual report on the circularity, the global circularity. And the bad news is that circularity has actually dropped. From 9.1% in 2015, we're down to 6.9%, which has several reasons. Number one, their calculations and their measurements has gotten a lot better. And number two, and that's the big one, although there are increased activities around circularity, increased initiatives, but our consumption and our resource extraction has risen at the same time massively. So it kind of counters it. So only 6.9% of materials that enter the global economy are actually secondary. Everything else is virgin material that's extracted from the earth. Which means we need to think and act bigger. And this is a number that came from this year's Circular Economy Gap report, which I think is an important one to keep in mind. Even if you would 100% recycle everything that that's currently not recycled, we would still only achieve about 20% circularity. This is because first of all, many things are not recyclable, but also because the rate in which we consume is increasing. So again, to the point, yes, recycling has to be part of the solution, but it's unfortunately not possible to just stick with the current system and just add on recycling at the end. We need to think bigger, we need to think more systemic, and we need to start upstream. Yeah, that was my reaction when I saw this number. So then, what is circular innovation? Circular innovation is really thinking broad across products, services, organizations, and ecosystem. And I'm not going to share any examples here because we have a whole set of really exciting local solutions here today. And I will let them share about what they actually do in terms of new business models, moving from selling to renting, new product and service ideas and systems, instead of like single use, having reuse and refill, but also looking at organizational change, how we actually need to redesign organizations in order to make them fit for this new kind of economy. And I think this is another thing that came up yesterday in the evening panel strongly, and I think that's a topic that will come up a lot in the other days as well. We need to have collaboration and systemic change across stakeholders. It is not just one organization or one community going circular. It's about all the supply chain partners working together. It's about the business, but also consumers, other businesses, policymakers, academia, finance, etc., all coming together. It's not a single stakeholder activity. It's about networking and collaboration. So, last slightly negative slide, or not a very negative slide, and then I'll share some optimistic outlooks. So yes, we need to change. It makes business sense. It makes sense for the environment, for our own survival. But I also wanted to share another very important slide, and this is from a paper that just came out a few weeks ago. Also building upon the concept of the planetary boundaries, as well as the donut economy from Kate Raworth, which is basically overlapping the ecological ceiling, so the planetary boundaries, as well as the social foundation. So basically the basic needs that should be covered. And what they basically analyzed the last 20 years, what are the overshoots and who's producing them, and what are the impacts and who is suffering them. And unfortunately, the message is very, very clear. The richest 20% drive 40% of planetary overshoot, which includes all of us here. And the poorest 40% bear 60% of global suffering. So it is not just imperative because of business and because of our own survival, but it's also just a just thing to do. So now, I hope I have you successfully depressed. You might think, is it all too little, too late, too complicated, too hard? Maybe, but I actually think it's a huge opportunity for innovation. I think it's actually, it might sound weird, quite exciting to see how can we take this as a springboard. And so I just want to end with a few slides to just list some of the reasons why to go circular. First of all, it's a huge business opportunity. There's actually some calculations that the circular economy potential is around $4.5 trillion, according to McKinsey. So there is also money to be made. It's also a chance to actually extend again the point on value beyond price. It's not just the price question, but actually, can you, by extending your connection with consumers through continuous engagement like repair services, upgrade services, etc., you can create higher loyalty and higher customer retention. Increase your brand perception, provide more convenience, etc. And this is, again, where we as designers, and pointing at my students, can come in. But also, values are changing. And I know there's like backlash on like Vogue and whatever, but fundamentally we see that increasingly younger generation, but I don't want to say just younger generation, there is a change in how customers and consumers see the responsibility of companies. So 80% actually expect companies to do their part. And when the slide comes up, I'll just talk over it. There's also for business itself, and again, David was sharing in the beginning of the day, there's a lot of like risk mitigation in the circular economy because it actually allows you to use less resources potentially. So cut your cost. It also allows you to de-risk your supply chain. And there's a lot of saving again to be had by just shifting to reusable and reusable materials, like, for example, Muse, exactly. In the background, I see them dancing. So Muse is a great example. If you haven't had your snack yet, go grab it later. You can actually save money and de-risk if you reuse. So going circular has many benefits and many advantages. It makes business sense. It's good for the planet, and it is good for business. The leverage point that I found for me as a designer is a statistic that the European Union published, I think, like 5 years ago, that 80% of the environmental impact of a product or service is actually determined during the design phase. And once I understood that, I also understood that me as a designer and as a business owner have a huge responsibility, but also an opportunity to actually make things different. And you don't have to be a designer in order to take advantage of that. So I hope that the sharings today will be insightful, will be inspiring, and I hope you make a lot of great connections. For that, enjoy.